Can you hear me? We're doing a mic check now. I think it sounds good to me, right? Everybody here in the back? Okay, good, thank you. Okay, we're gonna get going. We're doing self-introductions, and a lot of you know me. That's a lot. I'm Holly Zanville, and I'm at the George Washington Institute of Public Policy, helping to co-lead a new program on on skills, credentials, and workforce policy. And I'm also the co-lead of a national initiative that I'm going to be talking about today called Credential As You Go. And I was a former Lumina strategy director for almost 15 years. So that's how I know a lot of you from my former grant world. So this is good to see everybody, and I know you're all doing truly amazing work. So today, actually, I was one of the ones who raised my hand yesterday when Mark asked how many people were just getting out of their house. And I was one of the ones that have been in my dining room new office that I made since March 2020. So it's wonderful to be in person, and I'm glad those of you are joining us virtually as well. So today, I'm here to talk about trains. The thousands of trains of innovation that are burning track across the nation. And I'm going to see how, yeah. And they have destinations. Things like digital badges, skills-based hiring, blockchain, stackable credentials, competency skills and frameworks. Many of these trains left the innovation station years ago. Some of the trains are old, and some are newer ones that travel fast and they're outfitted with the latest tech. Well, if you're a student trying to navigate your way through our learn and work ecosystem, which train do you try to get on? The old one, the new one, the ones that stop and let you transfer to another train, enabling you to move more easily among a system of trains and destinations? And where do you go to figure this out? Is there a Kayak, Expedia, or Travelocity for the learn and work ecosystem? There are the beginnings of many types of platforms and navigation systems that many of you are involved in this room, but they're still pretty early in their development. Most of us in this room recognize these destinations on this signpost in the learn and work ecosystem, but I would argue that most people outside this room do not. And if you don't know what these things are, and there's a list of 100 more that I could have put on a signpost if I had the time, if you don't know these terms, how are you going to board a train with confidence in your direction, your journey? So my question today is, isn't the learn and work ecosystem confusing enough? Do we need more trains of innovation? I'm here to answer yes to both. Yes, the learn and work ecosystem is confusing enough, and yes, we need more trains of innovation. The two I'm most involved in right now are, I'm sorry that the sun is coming in because I worked really hard to get the name on the train. So one of these trains is the Credential As You Go train, and it has a destination to build an incremental credentialing system in the US. The second train is a digital learn and work ecosystem library, which has a destination to inform folks about the US learn and work ecosystem. And if any of you want copies of the slides, just catch me later or send me an email, and I'm happy to share those with you. I saw lots of you were getting your phones out yesterday to take pictures of slides. But before I briefly describe the journey that these two trains are embarked on, let me share some of the key drivers for this work. If our two new trains have rear view mirrors, and I actually looked up, I Googled to find out that trains do have rear view mirrors, which I didn't know, but they do. And they're very high-tech operations. But if they had them, our trains, this is what we would be seeing years ago when we were focusing primarily on the problems. The biggest question marks in our learn and work ecosystem. First, and I hope you can see this. First, we were noticing learners playing what seemed like a new game. I call it credential poker. And this did not seem like a good game to play. Students sitting around a proverbial poker table, holding cards, degrees, certifications, certificates, badges, trying to determine which credential cards constitute the best hand. Then there were the return on investment questions. When you take your credentials, like a degree, certification, and certificate, and put them into the proverbial bank counting machine, what do they add up to? We didn't know years ago, and we're just now starting to ask those questions and get some data, though I don't think the data is all that great still. And then questions about the value of college degrees. There's our college graduate, if you can see him, not doing so well here, sitting under a bridge with his knapsack, while faculty look down from the bridge. The faculty think he's going to be fine because he has a degree. Well, what do you think is in his knapsack? I think it's huge student debt. And we know that our graduate may not fare as well in the marketplace if he has one of the college majors that doesn't do so well. And in an increasing skills marketplace, he may not have the skills to obtain a good job. Is he facing going back to school to acquire skills now, or can he find a job with an employer who has a training program that will help him acquire skills? Many of you have seen in the news recently that the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce has a new database ranking 4,500 colleges and universities based on their return on investment, not completion. They're reporting that at 30% of those colleges, 1,233, more than half of the students 10 years after enrollment are earning less than a high school graduate. Well, while these cartoons that I shared with you were drawn some years back, actually, when I was at Lumina Foundation, when we're focusing more on the problems in the credentialing system, they are still unfortunately too true for many of our learners. And these scenarios are key drivers for solutions. And the many innovation trains that are burning track around the nation are indeed about solutions. So first, I want to share four of these big assemblages of trains in my mind. You can see I like trains quite a bit. Apologies to that. There are credential trains bringing solutions to the education provider world with destinations like stackable credentials, guided pathways, reverse transfer associate degrees, apprenticeships, career and technical education, digital badges, certifications embedded in degree programs, and so many others. Then there are a rash of trains that are carrying solutions to employers with destinations like skills-based hiring, job postings in the language of competencies, building a diverse workforce, tuition assistance programs, awarding employer credentials themselves, internships and other work and learn programs, and partnering with higher ed to meet employer needs for upskilling. Then there are trains with quality assurance solutions, accreditation reforms to accommodate or at least to consider non-degree credentials among the credentials that higher ed institutions offer, standards boards, and many of them are international standards boards, learning outcomes frameworks, licensing boards, national exams in various occupations and unions. And there are, I call them the freight trains that are pulling heavy database cars, trying to answer questions that inform us about how well our system is working or not working. There's the data collected from education providers, mostly of enrollment and completion. Think about NCES and the National Student Clearinghouse. There are the job ads databases, the resume databases, the wage and employability databases, gig worker databases, and supply and demand databases, and what we learned just recently, the new college return on investment database developed by the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce. Well, I just sketched out 4 of these large categories in the ecosystem, big trains on the move, but we think there are actually 8 to 10 of these large categories that comprise what we call the learn and work ecosystem. So 4 other really important ones, and we talked a lot about the first one on this list, record keeping and verification systems yesterday. These are the systems to verify skills and competencies, including non-classroom learning, and to build digital records to be able to easily exchange learning throughout the ecosystem, maybe through the e-wallets they're going to be developing. Another is policy incentives that set the rules, accountability and resources from federal and state policies, from employer policies, from union programs, and from community-based programs. Then there's a big area of work in the ecosystem around career planning to help individuals navigate the system, and communications to explain the ecosystem to the public and to niche audiences. Many don't think about communications as a key part of the ecosystem, but it is, and Paul Fain could attest to that, trying to explain the ecosystem, not only to the inside audience, but to the outside audience. So think of the learn and work ecosystem. I'm an old biology major. So think about the learner week ecosystem using the language of ecology. In a biological ecosystem, there are many species of animals, plants, the water, air systems, the microorganisms. Just like a biological system, the learn and work ecosystem has many components, and for a healthy ecosystem, all the interdependent components must flourish. So I ask myself this question, and a lot of my colleagues do as well. Do we have a healthy learn and work ecosystem? I don't think so. And this is one of the drivers of the many trains of innovation, trying to bring solutions to the parts of the ecosystem to improve it. So here's a wish I have, and I think a lot of folks sort of wish it. I wish you could see it better. But this is one of those maps you get when you visit one of the big zoos, like the San Diego Zoo. You know what animals are there and where they are, the giraffes, the elephants, the reptiles, and so on. And when you visit those areas of the ecosystem, there's a lot of good information to fill you in about the species and the terrain that they inhabit. We need maps like this to understand our learn and work ecosystem. And I've been in this for a while, and I don't know where to go to find that. So Credential As You Go is one of those new trains of innovation. It's founded in the recognition that our current degree-centric system is not working for everyone, and it's not going to meet our 21st century workforce needs. The US has a dated degree-centric system. Some people say it's 200 years old when higher ed was just starting, but it's at least 100 years old. It's a 4-tiered system of associate degrees, bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees, but it takes too long, and the cost is prohibitive for many to complete, especially for learners who need to focus on work, family, and other obligations. The system does not recognize partial degrees. You wouldn't put it on their resume, I got a partial degree. And often people who don't have a degree are treated as if they have no learning. This can hinder their employment options and hinder furthering their education. The bottom line is this is a fairness issue, it's an equity issue. The 2019 census data informs us that about half of the adults in the US have no college credential. This actually may have increased due to COVID in the last 2 years, but I don't have the numbers. Of the 81 million adults without post-secondary credentials in 2019, some 36 to 40 million had some college, but no degree. So let's think about these folks. They were acquiring knowledge and skills that could potentially have been counted towards shorter term credentials when they were enrolled in college, and many have acquired knowledge and skills in the work world and in other ways in which learning is acquired. But we don't have a system for recognizing, for capturing this learning. The largest proportion of those with some college and no degree are Black adults who also carry the highest debt load. While 51% of white adults are degreed, for Latinx adults, it's 27%. There's a clear differential between students of color and their access to completing credentials in higher ed compared to white students. The bottom line, we don't have a fair higher ed system for all Americans. With this growing recognition, I wish you could see this one better. With this growing recognition that our higher ed system is unfair to many, and many think that there is important learning in colleges and universities going unrecognized at both the undergraduate and the graduate levels. Most of us talk about this as a sub-baccalaureate degree issue, but this is also a graduate level issue. We're imagining student demonstrations one of these days in which students demand that their learning be recognized, be credentialed. We recently commissioned a young artist right out of college to portray this concept for us, that students have to be drivers in the changes needed in higher ed, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if as students get more familiar with the credentialing system we have, that they don't start demanding recognition of their learning, particularly when they leave before they finish a degree. So how is the Credential As You Go initiative thinking this learning could be recognized? Through incremental credentials, defined as credentials that capture learning as it's acquired along the learning pathway, and formally recognizing and connecting that learning then to a larger context. These can be non-credit and credit-bearing, undergraduate and graduate level, and any size, from small units of learning through degrees. Incremental credentialing, then, is the overall design and process used to develop and connect credentials to further learning and employment. There's really a purposefulness in incremental credentialing to ensure that learners are recognized for what they know and can do as they acquire that learning, so that our system does not leave learners without formal documentation of that learning. Well, given our limited time today, I'm not going to go into the details of implementing an incremental credentialing system on the ground, but I want you to know that there's a schema of at least 6 ways that workforce learning and credentials can be brought into credentialing pathways, where smaller credentials build into certificates and degrees, and where there can be intermediate credentials between degrees. I want to just share with you a little about how this is being managed so you'll know who to contact if you want to later on. This work actually started with a planning grant from Lumina Foundation when I was a strategy director there, to the State University System of New York to explore the concept of incremental credentialing. New York faculty from community colleges and four-year institutions developed this schema. It's a draft. Phase 2 then is being funded by a 3-year federal grant through the U.S. Department of Education's Institute of Educational Sciences. And we're very grateful that they're really helping us to try to develop this approach to transforming the higher ed system of the U.S. A small, a small effort. But we know that it's going to take a tremendous number of collaborators, and I want to share with you a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes. So Credential As You Go is a collaborative initiative led by 3 groups: SUNY Empire State College's Center for Leadership in Credentialing Learning, the Corporation for Skilled Workforce out of Ann Arbor, and the Program on Skills, Credentials, and Workforce Policy at George Washington University, where I am. So behind the scenes, there's a co-management team of Nan Travers, many of you know Nan, at SUNY Empire, Larry Good at CSW, and myself. And we have a large and growing national advisory board. Some of you in this room are on the board, and thank you so much for helping us to guide this work. Right now, there's 114 members, and we're growing it. These are influential people in all aspects of the ecosystem, because it's going to take a lot to carry this work forward. So the Credential As You Go initiative actually began work this past fall when we received the federal grant with 3 states: New York, Colorado, and North Carolina. They're working to prototype incremental credentials using this schema, and the schema may not work, but they're trying it out. This is a very large body of work in Credential As You Go. Actually, there's 8 distinct bodies of work, and to portray this, we have created the Credential As You Go umbrella. You'll be relieved that it's not another train. But I also like umbrellas. So the first body of work is really focused on increasing the number of incremental credentials that are formally recognized through rapid prototyping in a group of colleges and universities in Colorado, North Carolina, and New York. And it's about half community colleges and about half four-year institutions. And if we had had to pick, I probably would have started with the four institutions, because I think that's the lever, the biggest lever we have for change, given the dropouts out of the regional public institutions for not recognizing learning that occurs before the baccalaureate. But at any rate, we're happy to be working with all the institutions, because that's the large kind of changes we need. So that's the first body of work around prototyping. The second is exploring what needs to be in place to inform and build an understanding and support for incremental credentials through a national campaign. And the campaign is aimed at 5 different audiences. There's actually more than 5, but we're particularly concerned about these 5. Students, employers, higher ed institutions, policymakers, and workforce boards. And that artist that I told you about, we're commissioning her to start with doing 10 cartoons for us, frankly, that are aimed at each stakeholder groups, because the messages are a little different for the different stakeholder groups in any kind of a national campaign. The third area in the umbrella, which I know is hard to see, and I'm probably doing them a little bit out of order, is research, studying the feasibility of incremental credentials and the impact on student outcomes. One of our key research questions is, will we have a fair higher ed system if incremental credentialing takes off? We need evidence to move to scale. And a big part of the Department of Education's interest is, frankly, on the research side. A fourth area under the umbrella is providing training and technical assistance to make sure that institutions and employers have the support they need to design and implement incremental credentials. A fifth body of work is ensuring that we create a more equitable and inclusive system that has learning options that don't have dead ends, but clearly shows ways in which a learner can connect documented and credentialed learning to the next types of credentials that they may wish to acquire, whether that's with employment or continuing their education. A sixth body of work is focusing on policy changes, especially state policy that's needed to support incremental credentials. Many of you may come from states where your 4 institutions are actually prohibited from offering a credential below the baccalaureate degree, like you maybe cannot offer associate degrees. And this is a point of contention. What about those students who start at the 4-year institution, and they achieve the equivalent of an associate degree, but they're not enabled to be able to receive an associate degree, and they're at the university, so they're not going to send them to their nearby community college for this. This is a serious issue, and about half the states in the U.S. have policy that prohibits the 4 institutions from moving that direction. But we're actually working with states that are like Colorado that is changing their policy to be permissive, so the 4 institutions know they can move. They don't have to call it an associate degree. They can make up a new name for something that's is valuable learning below the baccalaureate if they want to make up a new name. No one is telling them you have to use the word associate degree, so who knows. So at any rate, there's a lot of work around the policy realm in order to facilitate this set of developments. A 7th area is around building trust in a range of different stakeholders and the quality of incremental credentials, a huge issue I know you all know about. And finally, under the umbrella, building interconnections with related initiatives to leverage resources and improve the workings of our ecosystem. We're not wanting to do all the work through Credential As You Go. When we asked North Carolina how many other initiatives are sort of related, because we're trying to identify in those 3 states what's the state of play in your state, they came up with 17. Colorado has more than that. So we're trying to say, get a hold of all the stuff you're doing, try to pull it together, and can we leverage all of those resources? Because the faculty are confused. They don't even know what project they're working on part of the time, given the amount of activity that is spawned by all those trains that have solutions. So that's the umbrella. And to support Credential As You Go, oh, I hit the wrong button, there's this other effort, not only to support Credential As You Go, but the many other efforts that are working to improve our learner work ecosystem. We're developing a digital learner work ecosystem library. While this is in the early stages of development, the train speed is picking up. We have established a national advisory board to guide this work. We have drafted a glossary of key definitions, concepts, and use of terms in the learner and work ecosystem, because we're hearing that there's growing confusion about the use of these terms, and we're hearing it from faculty who are just starting their work. So the faculty in these prototyping states are saying, well, if they develop these various new incremental credentials, are there some common definitions in the field that they should use? What are other states doing? So we don't have a lot of good answers. And it would be helpful if we had some common use of terms for these things. So we're assembling many definitions out there. We're identifying who's defining them, because we want to know who are the players in this space. And then we're identifying when and how they're being used to provide this information to the faculty. We also just completed a survey to send to national experts in the ecosystem. We asked them to rate 11 potential categories for importance. These might be categories for potential inclusion at the library. Well, you can see what the top areas came. These are in rank order. I don't know if you can see the percents. The top was 93%. Pathways to credentials, that was rated as the most important among them. Record keeping and verifications, I know a lot of you are in that space. Employers and workforce, policy and incentives, career planning, navigation. We're down to 75%. Data standards, databases, research. We're down to 71%. Transparency and credentials. Value and quality, I thought that might be higher, but it's 70%. The alliances, the networks, and the intermediaries. We need to know who are the players in this space, and a lot of people don't know about intermediary land. I learned that at Lumina Foundation. The huge amount of intermediaries that are now helping higher ed and employers to figure all this out. And there's a lot going on globally. I think globally should have been higher on the list, but at rate 53%. But we think we need to know that we're not unique in the U.S. This is going on in many, many other nations. And then last, which I didn't want this to be at the bottom either, I wish everyone had a tie score personally, is understandable ecosystem through communications, because we know if people don't understand our system, they're not going to be able to function well, and we have not a very understandable system. So we know among this list that there are apples and oranges in the list, and we have to try to sort this out. And among these categories, not to confuse things more, but I have to, we identified 97 potential subcategories that fell among these areas, and we asked our experts to rate them for importance. We're going to be sharing a report soon on what those 97 are. You can guess, some of them were on that signpost. blockchain, and I'll share with you at the end some of those names. So at any rate, we're trying to figure this out, and you could ask, well, why are we doing all this? We're trying to inform the ontology of the library. So think about a card catalog in a brick and mortar library. What are the topics we should provide in our, let's say, new library for the learn and work ecosystem? How should we organize the categories of knowledge for a digital format, and who needs this information the most? Who's going to come to the library? So that's a little bit about our two trains of innovation, Credential As You Go and the Learn and Work Ecosystem Library. If these two trains have successful journeys over the next several years, we think we'll have a fairer higher ed system that enables individuals to be credentialed as they gain knowledge and skills, not delay this recognition to only when achieving a traditional degree program. Think about that 50% of learners who stop or drop out of our public college and universities. Did they acquire knowledge, skills, abilities, or attributes that could be credentialed? And we think we'll also have a wiki-type library to keep us informed about the key components of our learn and work ecosystem that's updated by our community. So maybe, my hope is we'll have an understandable map like the San Diego Zoo has to guide folks through their complicated ecosystem for our own complicated learn and work ecosystem. So I'm going to stop here because I'm hoping there's some time for questions. I didn't check my watch. But I want to thank you for letting me share these developments, but particularly the big picture, the dimension and the complexity of the ecosystem that we're all working in. And I looked through the program. I couldn't get to all your sessions, but just amazing work you're all doing. So just thank you. You are in those trains, whether you know it or not, that are driving track around the nation. And maybe some of you, I know some of you, are also having some international impacts as well. So I'm happy to take questions if any came in through virtual land or whatever. And if not, I can do an ad for a summit we have coming up. But why don't we do questions first, and then if there's any time, I'll. Okay, well then I'm going to do my ad real quick. So some of you are interested in this. On March 16, from 1 to 2:30 Eastern Standard Time, Credential As You Go is hosting a Zoom summit on the definitions problems. And I guess I should give you where you can get in touch with me. We're focusing on 3 areas where we're getting particular questions on all these definitions. The key credential and pathways terms around equity and fairness. People are saying, well, what does fairness mean? How are we even using that word? Should we even use that word in an equity conversation? And then the third one is on learning outcomes and learning skills. And several folks in this room are going to join us on some panels, and we'll have some documentation, particularly on some of those definitions. And I think I mentioned that we're starting to pull these definitions together, and we'll have that available to folks. And we have pages and pages of definitions on things like articulation, alternative credentials, who's identifying them, what's a badge backpack? Not all the faculty know this. We can even not agree on always what a degree is in the new Credential As You Go. Front-loaded embedded non-degree pathways. Like, what is that? Guided pathways, incremental credentialing system, learning stack, license. Stackable credentials, stackable degree program, stackability. People have said, oh, I know what you're doing at Credential As You Go. You're doing stackable. Well, that's one thing but it's not, that's really not what we're doing. But we cannot explain it. So when we can't explain things, we either make cartoons up, or we go and we pull in definitions from all of you, and then we're going to put it all together, and maybe it'll get in the library someday, but for sure it'll be at the Credential As You Go summit that we're holding. So if any of you want to attend that, either send me an email or something, and I'll get you the invite, and you can get the Zoom call-in number. So that's what we're doing on the summit, and that's as much as I have for you today. So thanks again.